All right, our last topic for 1.1 is developments in Europe. Okay, so for core religious and cultural ideology, which is again very high priority, we have Christianity, in particular the Roman Catholic Church, and then the notion of secular versus religious authority, which is one of the bigger themes for Europe during this time period. For Christianity, just like Hinduism was for South Asia and Islam was for Dar al Islam, Christianity is the foundation of European society. It unified European culture. And politically, the church had a significant influence. The Roman Catholic Church, in particular, this is one of the most high frequency topics because it was the dominant religious institution, and because it had such an influence in politics. Kings had to conform, and laws were based off of Christianity and Catholicism, and daily life functioned around the Mass and the Roman Catholic Church. For secular versus religious authority, we do begin to see the emergence of a power struggle between monarchs and the church. And that's going to come to a head later on in period two with the Protestant Reformation. Political systems and governance. This is the number one most tested concept for anything involving Europe at this time. It's going to be feudalism. But as I said before, feudalism in Europe during this time period in period one is often, if it's brought up on the test, it's because they want to draw comparisons to labor systems, in particular similarities and differences between feudalism in Europe versus feudalism in Japan. So just keep that in mind. For feudalism in Europe, it was decentralized, based entirely on land and loyalty. The different hierarchy levels, you had lords, the vassals, the knights, and then the peasant class, of course. Um, it is important to note that the serfs or the peasants, they were bound to the land. They were not slaves. It was not the same thing. Say later on during the Crusades, one of the kings, or not kings, but one of the lords goes off to fight. His eldest son goes off to fight. They both end up dead in battle. And this is something that will bring about, it's one of the things that ends feudalism, is the fact that there was a vacancy and power vacuum now for a lot of that territory if it was not claimed by a male relative. And so because of that, we do see the power of the kings begin to grow in a time where their relationship with the Catholic Church was already beginning to fragment a little bit, because they're gonna sweep in and basically take the land that had been vacated. A lot of that is also based off of the primogeniture laws, which stated again that the eldest son was entitled to gaining every asset. So unless it had been stated in a document, a legal document, that some of the wealth was going to go to other siblings, it was automatically assumed that the eldest son would get everything. But if he disappeared, if he died, something happens, whatever, freak accident, exposure to disease, it left that land up for grabs. A lot of times you would see a male relative come in and take it if there was one present, but if there wasn't, the land was just going to sit there. And so the serfs and the peasants, they were bound to that land. It didn't matter whether or not ownership changed, they still had to stay there. Manorialism kind of preceded feudalism. It was an economic system based off of uh, the fact that there was a manor, a state where the lord and lady were at the center of that. There was always a church. And their job, again, very, very similar to feudalism, was to produce crops for the manor itself. And in return, they would receive protection from the king and the knights. So a lot of similarities there. One is economic, one is mostly political. We do also begin to see decentralization during this time period. There was not a major unifying empire, dynasty, or state. We will see them emerge during this time period. But as of right now, there was nothing unifying. So we see a lot of decentralization since during the Dark Ages and the High Middle Ages, which is where the course begins for Europe. It's just a bunch of weak central governments, and power was held by local lords, which is, of course, what led to manorialism and feudalism. Cultural and intellectual developments, one of the most talked about things on the exam involving intellectual developments for Europe is scholasticism, which combined faith and reason. It was greatly influenced by classical texts from Greece and Darul Islam. In addition, universities were beginning to develop. This is going to really take off after the Society of Jesus provides some counter resistance to the Protestant Reformation. But these are going to be obviously centers of higher learning. We also see revival of classic knowledge, which was preserved by the Muslim world, that will begin to re-enter Europe. All of this is going to come to a head, of course, towards the end of this period. So we've got 1200 to 1450. In the 1400s, we start to see the beginning of the Renaissance. And so you could definitely see a CCOT type question that involves this. I've said numerous times, though, there is an AP Euro class. And so because of that, just like with APUSH, generally speaking, you're going to see questions involving Europe and US direct questions involving their history. They're not going to be on the test. It's going to be what influence or what was the link to some other part of the world. And so here, that's why it's important to note that a lot of the intellectual developments are going to come from exposure to knowledge from Darul Islam. For economic systems, agriculturally, we see a second agricultural revolution. Heavy plows, the three-field system with crop rotation did increase productivity, and so we do see the beginning of a new agricultural revolution. We also see growth of trade, which led to the rise of towns and cities, but that in and of itself had an issue too, especially when we're talking about the spread of pathogens and overpopulation. Guild system was also developed. This was something that was established by men who were experts in their craft, and so they created these groups of like skill sets that allowed men to become masters of that craft. They would then take on an apprentice, train that apprentice. And then eventually, if the apprentice wanted to, they could apply to the guild to become a master of them for themselves. And then they would take on an apprentice as well. So that was the guild system, but it basically regulated trade and crafts or different occupations, like labor occupations at that time. The commercial revolution also took place. The early stages of it will begin. And this is where we see the expansion of markets and banking. This is going to be most notable, of course, in the Italian city-states, especially with Florence, because of the Medici family. So we will talk about that a little bit later. We do see major disruptions, and this is going to be one of the most high-frequency topics that you will see for period one, in addition to Montemus. So this is going to be one of the big ones. So Black Death, plague, high frequency. As it relates to Europe, it is estimated that 1/3 of Europe's population will perish during exposure to this pathogen. This is going to be in the 1300s. It also was something that will weaken feudalism. So just like eventually the Crusades will be one of the final nails in the coffin for feudal system, this is going to be something that will begin to impact it a little bit before. So, because it also will lead to the death of lords and ladies of certain manors. And then, of course, we have that power vacuum, just like what we will have with the Crusades. For significant people, Thomas Aquinas is a major mentionable individual on the exam. He was a key figure in scholasticism. But in addition, we also see Pope Urban II, because remember, he is the Pope. There are a couple different popes that really tend to make an appearance on the AP exam. The first is going to be Pope Urban II. The other one will be Pope Leo X, because of the Protestant Reformation. Leo X, of course, was a Medici. Pope Urban II, he basically, at this time, he represented church authority, because he was the Pope. He was the individual. He was the Pope that will specifically call for a crusade. His famous quote has appeared on the exam before, the one that talks about expelling the wicked from the promised land, from Jerusalem and Constantinople. He also spoke on that as well. So That is typically how you will see him being brought up on the exam. Major states and political entities, feudalism, of course, particularly as it relates to feudalism in England, France. Know generally, you don't need to really know specific rulers, but just know the general notion of decentralized monarchies. The Holy Roman Empire will develop. Charlemagne is going to be a major figure that because he will be crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor. So we do see with the Holy Roman Empire, there is a loose collection of territories that will emerge. Of course, this will precede first, contextualization. This will precede Prussia. It will precede Germany. The Byzantine Empire. This is a very, very important connected topic to continuity and change over time involving context. That's a lot, but just know that if you see, you're not going to see something directly about the Byzantine Empire. You will typically see something involving how because of the fact that the Byzantine Empire existed, it did preserve Roman and Greek traditions, and it also linked Europe to the Muslim world. But again, this would be context based. If there's anything you need to study for this section at all, it's going to be these topics here: feudalism, manorialism, Roman Catholic Church and its power, Black Death and the spread of plague and the impact it had in Europe, scholasticism, and of course, decentralization. The way you could see these topics appear for multiple choice, you could see something like, what was a major effect of the Black Death? Obviously, the decline of feudalism, labor shortages, and just simply an impact on the population of Europe at that time. Anytime you have that, you've got a disruption in the economics of that region. The plague is going to have the exact same impact on the Silk Road throughout Asia. It didn't spare anybody, right? So if you have merchants who are passing away, merchants that you have strategically placed at different locations throughout the Silk Road trading post locations, right? If they die, there is no person there who knows how to do that skill. So it's going to cause a major disruption. Anywhere where plague is spread, we're going to see a very significant disruption to economic productivity at that time because of labor shortages. For SAQs, you could see something like explain one feature of European political organization. The biggest duh here is going to be feudalism, manorialism, but feudalism as the key. For LEQ and DBQ topics, you could see something involving the role of religion in society, decentralization of political systems, the impact the Black Death had. Remember, this is an environmental topic. Anything having to do with pathogens is environmental. So if they phrase it that way, something involving environmental causation or impacts, you can use pathogens. That is one of the things you can discuss. And finally, comparison with more centralization or comparison to regions that had a lot more centralized governments, like Song China. Big takeaways for Europe at this time is going to be the fact that it was a lot less centralized than other regions. Society was organized around feudal relationships. Christianity dominated culture and politics. The Black Death and transference of these pathogens will transform society and the economy. And we will see an increase in trade and learning begin to reshape Europe because of exposure to Darul Islam and the fact that several of the classical Greek texts from the greats were preserved in some way, shape, or form and will eventually make their way and reappear in Europe. Okay, and so that is it for Unit 1. The other sections of Unit 1 are basically just a comparison, which is all we did. So the only thing I haven't done, because I went over it in class today, and I'll make this video later, was 1.1, section 1.1, which is developments in East Asia, which I will make a video for those of you who didn't show up today for the lunch review, because some of the most highly frequent topics for the AP exam for multiple choice questions involving Unit 1 and Period 1 actually come from 1.1 developments in East Asia. Okay, that is it for now. I will try to make more videos and post them as I can.